Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found a live stream on the dark web. The camera was in my room. I don't usually post here, but something happened a few weeks ago that I can't stop thinking about. Honestly, I'm not even sure I should be talking about this, but I feel like I have to tell someone. So, for a little background, I've always been the kind of guy who gets curious about weird stuff online. You know, urban legends, internet mysteries, even the occasional deep dive into conspiracy theories on Reddit. Nothing too crazy, just that feeling of being in the know about the strange corners of the web. But this was different. It started one boring Friday night. I'd gone through my usual YouTube feed, exhausted Netflix, and honestly, I just wanted something different. That's when I remembered the deep web. Not the dark web specifically, but the deep web, like that part of the internet that isn't indexed by search engines. I'd read about it, watched a couple of videos, and I figured, why not? Let's check it out. I'll admit up front, I didn't really know what I was doing. I'm no hacker or anything, but I'd watched enough tutorials to at least set up Tor and mess around a bit. So I went on there, half expecting to find some shady stuff, but mostly thinking I'd just see forums and maybe old file sharing sites or something. For the first couple of hours, that's exactly what it was. Just random message boards, old-looking websites, and more hitman for hire posts than I was comfortable with. I wasn't planning on staying long, just satisfying my curiosity. But then I found this one link. It didn't have a name, no description, just a string of numbers and letters that looked like gibberish. I hesitated for a second, but then curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The page that loaded was bare. No text, no flashy graphics, nothing. Just a single video player embedded in the middle of the screen with a title underneath. Live. At first, I figured it was just a broken link or maybe a dead stream, but when I hovered over the video, the play button was live. So, I clicked it, and the video started to buffer. Now here's where things start getting weird. The stream wasn't some grainy, low-quality webcam footage like I expected. In fact, the image was surprisingly clear. The room on screen was pretty normal looking, like a typical bedroom, dimly lit, a bed in the corner, a desk with a computer, and a couple of posters on the walls. It was so mundane, you know? I actually laughed a little, thinking I'd found some random live feed of a kid's bedroom. There wasn't anyone in the shot, just the empty room, but I kept watching because, well, I guess I wanted to see if anything would happen. That's when I noticed something unsettling. The room looked familiar. I mean, not in a, oh, I've seen this before kind of way. More like I started recognizing specific things in the room. The way the bed was pushed up against the wall, the same exact lamp I had, the layout. It looked just like my room. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of it. There was no way, right? This was just some creepy coincidence. But then I noticed the posters on the wall, the same ones I had. At this point, I was feeling that cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. I was telling myself, nah, there's no way, it's not possible. But then the camera panned slightly to the right, just enough for me to see the closet door. And that's when I knew. The door had a distinct scratch on it, one that had been there for years after I accidentally hit it with my bike as a kid. I could even see the jacket I'd thrown over the chair earlier. It was my room. I froze. My hand started to shake, and I felt this wave of panic wash over me. There was no mistaking it. What I was watching was a live stream of my own room, except I wasn't in it, or at least I didn't think I was. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a camera set up in the corner, but there was nothing. I looked around frantically, trying to find anything that might explain what I was seeing, but my room was empty, just like the video. I went back to the stream, hoping, praying I was imagining things, but as I stared at the screen, something else caught my eye. The closet door. It was slightly ajar, and in the corner of the screen, just barely visible, I saw the faintest shadow. Something, or someone, was in my closet. At that moment, the stream glitched, just for a split second, but it was enough to make me close the browser in a panic. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mouth went dry, and I couldn't breathe for a second. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my monitor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a prank? Some kind of weird coincidence? I mean, there was no way someone could be streaming from my room, right? I wish I could say I didn't check again, but I did. My curiosity got the best of me. I opened the browser again, reloaded Tor, and went back to that link. But when I clicked on it this time, the stream was gone. Just a blank page. No video. No live button. Just nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise, every creak in the floorboards felt like someone was watching me, just out of sight. But here's the thing. Since that night, I've been hearing noises, little things, like soft shuffling or the sound of a door closing when I know I haven't touched it. And sometimes, when I'm in bed, I swear I can feel something watching me. I've searched my room 100 times, but there's nothing there. At least nothing that I can see. I'm not sure what's going on, but something about that stream, about what I saw, it's been messing with my head. And I can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was in my closet that night. They're still watching. I tried to convince myself that the stream was just some weird coincidence, maybe a prank or a messed up glitch, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't mess me up for the next couple of days. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment when I saw the closet door slightly ajar, or that shadow lurking just out of view. For the first couple of days after that, I couldn't relax in my own room. It's weird, right? This is supposed to be my space, my safe place, but now it felt off. Everything in the room was the same, but it was like I'd stepped into some alternate version of it. I started noticing small things that never used to bother me. The ticking of the clock on my desk, the way the window would rattle when the wind picked up, the creak in the floorboards by my closet. Little things that suddenly felt so much louder. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One night, maybe 2 days after the whole dark web incident, I was in bed trying to fall asleep. The lights were off, and the only sound was the low hum of my fan. I had my back to the room, facing the wall, and I was scrolling through my phone, just trying to distract myself. But then, I heard it. That soft click of a door closing. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was just the house settling. You know, the kind of noise that's easy to explain away in an old house. But I knew it was the closet door. I didn't move right away. I just froze, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that I hadn't actually heard it. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds, I forced myself to turn over and face the room. The closet door was closed. I stared at it, barely breathing, waiting for, I don't even know what. Maybe for it to creak open again, or for that shadow to reappear. But nothing happened. The room was silent. The door stayed shut. Everything looked normal, but the air felt heavier somehow, like something was lingering just out of sight. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I made up my mind. I needed to check that closet. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe I was hoping for something simple, like a faulty door hinge or some logical explanation that would make me feel like an idiot for freaking out. But deep down, I think I knew I wouldn't find anything. When I got up the courage, I walked over to the closet and hesitated with my hand on the doorknob. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. It was ridiculous. This was my closet. I'd opened it 1,000 times before without a second thought. But now it felt like something was waiting on the other side, something I didn't want to see. Finally, I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging there, my shoes piled at the bottom, the same messy pile of stuff I always shoved to the side. Nothing out of the ordinary. No weird shadows, no secret cameras, no signs that anyone or anything had been in there. But as I stood there, staring into the dark space between the hanging jackets and sweaters, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a small draft, like cold air brushing against my face. I crouched down, moving some of the stuff around, and that's when I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the back wall of the closet. It was just a hairline fracture, maybe no more than an inch or two long, but when I ran my fingers over it, I could feel the faintest breeze seeping through. Now, I've lived in this house for years. I know every creak, every quirk of this place, and I've never noticed that crack before. I didn't think much of it at first. Old houses have drafts, right? Maybe a gap between the walls or something, but for some reason, it sent a shiver down my spine. I closed the closet door quickly, like shutting it would seal away whatever weirdness was leaking out from that crack. But that night, the noises started again. At first, it was the same faint shuffling I'd heard before, almost like something soft was dragging against the floorboards. But this time, it was louder, closer. I couldn't pinpoint the direction it was coming from, but it felt like it was inside the walls. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, listening. The sound was faint at first. Then it would stop for a long time, only to start again, closer, like it was moving. I don't know how long I lay there, too scared to move, when suddenly the scratching stopped. Dead silence, not even the hum of my fan. And then slowly, I heard it, the creak of the closet door. I didn't dare look. My body was frozen in place, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it was my imagination. But I could hear it. The soft creak of the door swinging open, the sound of the wood dragging against the floor as it moved. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes just a crack, terrified of what I might see. The door was open, just a sliver, the same as I'd seen it on the stream. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at the dark gap, waiting for something to emerge. But there was nothing, just the silence, and the faint outline of the door, slightly ajar. The next morning, I went straight to Home Depot and bought a padlock for the closet. I know, it sounds stupid, but I didn't care. I needed to feel like I had control over whatever was happening, even if it was just symbolic. I bolted that thing shut, locked it tight, and told myself it was over. No more shadows, no more sounds, just me and my locked closet. But that night, when I got home, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The padlock was still there, still latched and secure. But the closet door, it was wide open. I wish I could tell you that after I found the closet wide open, I did the smart thing and left. Maybe packed a bag, crashed at a friend's place for a while, or hell, even called the cops. But no, I did what any overly curious idiot would do. I stayed. There's something about being in a situation like this, where your brain tries to rationalize everything, no matter how messed up it seems. I kept telling myself, it's just a faulty lock, or maybe I didn't latch it right. But deep down, I knew better. That door didn't just open on its own. I locked the door again that night, double-checked it, yanked on it, pulled hard to make sure it was secure. Satisfied, I tried to put it out of my mind. But let's be real. How do you forget something like that? I lay in bed for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting. Nothing happened that night. No creaks, no sounds, no open doors, just silence. But the next day, something even weirder happened. I was at work, sitting in my cubicle, trying to focus on an endless stream of emails when I got a notification on my phone. It was from my computer's webcam software. The notification read, "Camera active, now live." I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe the software had glitched or something. Sometimes apps run in the background without you realizing it. But then I remembered something that made my stomach drop. I don't have my webcam connected. It's an old external camera I used for Zoom calls during the pandemic, but it's been sitting unplugged in my desk drawer for months. So, how the hell was it active? I opened the app on my phone, half expecting to see an error message or something. Instead, the screen loaded up a live feed, and there it was, my room, on my phone, streaming live. The angle was from my desk, pointing directly at my bed. The lighting was low, but it was clear enough to see everything. My bed was unmade, the chair slightly turned out, just like I'd left it that morning. I stared at the feed, my heart racing. I was at work. There was no way this could be live. But the timestamp didn't lie. This was happening right now, in real time. And then, the camera moved. Just a slight shift, like someone had bumped it. The view adjusted, focusing more toward the closet. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the feed, frozen. My brain couldn't make sense of it. There was no way someone was in my room. It was locked. I was sure of it. But as I kept watching, the door to the closet came into view on the screen. It was closed, locked, exactly how I'd left it. Then, slowly, the camera panned back toward the bed. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible at the edge of the frame. It was standing just out of the camera's full view, partially obscured by the corner of my bed. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette, motionless, like it was waiting for something. I felt a lump in my throat. My mind raced with every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I was seeing this in real time. Someone, something was in my room, and it had been watching me the whole time. I slammed my laptop shut, grabbed my things, and rushed home. I don't remember the drive. I just remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Every possible explanation seemed worse than the last. When I got home, I hesitated at the front door. My house looked so normal from the outside, but I knew something was wrong inside. I could feel it. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I made my way to my bedroom, the door half open, just like I'd left it. And then I saw it. The camera. It wasn't my old external webcam. It was a small black device, tucked neatly into the corner of my desk, angled perfectly to capture the entire room. I hadn't put it there. I didn't own a camera like that. I approached it slowly, like getting too close would make it move or something, but it stayed there, silent, still recording. I checked the computer, but it wasn't even on. The camera had been streaming directly, without my laptop. I grabbed the camera and yanked it out of the socket, tossing it across the room like it was something dangerous. My breathing was shaky, my thoughts spiraling into paranoia. Someone had been watching me, maybe for days, maybe longer, but that wasn't even the worst part. When I looked back at the desk, I noticed something else that hadn't been there before. There was a small folded piece of paper sitting right where the camera had been. My hands were trembling as I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was written in messy, scrawled handwriting. Just 2 words. Check the closet. I stood there, staring at the note, my blood running cold. My eyes slowly drifted towards the closet door, still locked with the padlock I'd bought. There was no way I was going to open it, not after everything that had happened. But as I stood there, debating what to do, I heard it again, that faint scratching coming from inside the closet. I don't know what came over me, but I grabbed the key from my desk drawer and moved toward the closet. My mind was screaming at me not to do it, but my body moved on autopilot. The key slid into the lock, and I felt the click as the padlock released. I pulled the door open. The closet was empty. At first, I felt relief. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I noticed the crack in the back wall, the same crack I'd seen before. Except now, it was wider, just enough for me to see something behind it. A small, hidden compartment. And inside that compartment was another camera, pointed directly at my bed. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the crack in the closet wall. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. It was like some part of me had always known that something was wrong in this house. But this was proof. There was a camera, a tiny one, barely noticeable unless you knew exactly where to look. It was wedged into the small hidden compartment behind the crack, and it was aimed straight at my bed, just like the other one. I didn't touch it at first. I just stood there, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin, trying to make sense of how long it had been there, and worse, who had put it there. But the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't new. The compartment wasn't some accidental hole in the wall. It had been cut deliberately, the edges too smooth, too precise, like someone had spent time carving it out, carefully hiding the camera so it wouldn't be easily found. Someone had been watching me from inside my own walls. I felt sick. The room suddenly felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. I backed away from the closet, breathing hard, trying to keep my head from spinning. Who would do this? How long had this been going on? I thought about the camera I'd found on the desk earlier. There was no way this was the only one. I was being monitored. But by who? That's when I heard it again. The scratching. It was louder this time, more deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. It wasn't coming from the closet, though. This time, it was coming from behind the wall near my bed. I felt a chill creep up my spine. It wasn't the normal creaking of an old house. It was rhythmic, intentional, like fingers dragging across the wood. I turned slowly toward the noise, every muscle in my body screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't. Something was compelling me to stay, to figure out what was happening. I moved closer to the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The sound stopped as soon as I reached the spot where it was coming from. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening. For a moment, there was nothing, just the eerie silence of the house. And then, a voice, whispering. It was faint, barely audible, but I could hear it. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was there, just on the other side of the wall, like someone was standing right next to me, speaking softly into the wood. I backed away in a panic, grabbing my phone. I didn't know what I was going to do, call the cops, but what was I going to tell them? That my walls were whispering to me, that I'd found hidden cameras but didn't know who put them there? My mind was racing, but before I could do anything, my phone buzzed in my hand. A notification from the same webcam app as before. Live feed active, closet camera. I stared at my phone, dread building in my chest. The closet camera, the one I'd just found behind the wall. I hadn't even touched it. There was no way it should have been on. But as I opened the app, my blood ran cold. The live feed wasn't of my room anymore. It was showing a tunnel. The camera had shifted, or maybe there was more than one back there, but the view was different now. The screen showed a long, narrow tunnel, lined with wooden beams and dirt, like something you'd see in an old horror movie. The feed was grainy, dark, but I could make out the faint outlines of what looked like a path stretching deep into the house, maybe even under it. I couldn't breathe. There was a tunnel behind my closet. I watched the feed, my hand shaking as I held the phone. The camera slowly panned down the tunnel, showing nothing but darkness and old wooden beams. But then, the camera stopped, focusing on something. A figure. It was standing at the far end of the tunnel, barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't see its face, just the outline of a person standing perfectly still, facing the camera, watching. Then without warning, the camera cut out. The screen went black. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. There was someone, something, in that tunnel, and it had been there the whole time, just out of sight, watching from behind the walls. I scrambled to the closet, yanking it open again, frantically pulling at the crack in the wall. I could see the tunnel now, the faintest sliver of darkness stretching out behind the wooden beams. I pushed aside some of the debris in the closet and felt around for anything that might give me access. That's when I found it, a small handle hidden at the base of the closet wall. It was so subtle, so perfectly concealed, that I never would have noticed it if I wasn't looking for it. With trembling hands, I pulled on it. The wall gave way with a low groan, swinging open to reveal the entrance to the tunnel. A wave of cold air hit me, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for someone to squeeze through, and it disappeared into the darkness, the wooden beams lining the walls like the bones of some ancient creature. I stood there, staring into the blackness, my mind racing. This wasn't just some hidden crawl space. This was something else, something old, something wrong. I knew I should turn back, close the door, and call for help. But instead, I grabbed a flashlight from my desk drawer and stepped into the tunnel. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as I made my way deeper into the passage. The walls were rough, dirt crumbling beneath my fingers as I used the beams for support. The deeper I went, the more the tunnel seemed to narrow, the ceiling getting lower until I was practically crouching. Then, up ahead, I saw it. The end of the tunnel. There was a door, an old, rotting wooden door, barely hanging on its hinges. It looked ancient, like it had been there for decades, untouched by time. My flashlight flickered as I approached it, the beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, and slowly pushed it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a small, dimly lit room. And in the center of the room was something I'll never forget. A chair. And sitting in that chair was a man, or at least what was left of him. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the wall. He was completely still, like he'd been sitting there for years. And around him, scattered on the floor, were dozens of cameras, all pointed at the chair, all recording. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking, as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Who was this man? How long had he been down here? And then I saw the note, pinned to the wall behind him. In the same messy handwriting as before, it read, "You're next." I stood there, staring at the note, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're next." It was such a simple, terrifying message, but in that moment, my brain couldn't process it. The words just hung in the air, suffocating me, blending with the stale, musty smell of the room. The man in the chair. I couldn't stop looking at him. His face, pale and gaunt, frozen in that vacant stare, like he'd seen something that had sucked the life right out of him. But the worst part, I realized he wasn't strapped to the chair. His hands and feet were free. He'd chosen to sit there, waiting. But for what? I wanted to turn and run, get out of that tunnel, out of this nightmare. But I couldn't leave without answers. I had to know what the hell was happening, why there were cameras hidden in my walls, why someone was watching me, monitoring me. My hand was shaking, but I forced myself to shine the flashlight around the room. The walls were lined with old, rusted metal shelves, and on those shelves were boxes, dozens of them. Each box had a label, handwritten in that same scratchy writing from the notes. I stepped closer, squinting in the dim light to make out the labels. One read, Subject 003. Another, Subject 010. The boxes seemed to go on forever, stretching into the darkness at the back of the room. Each box was sealed with tape, but my curiosity, despite my fear, got the better of me. I reached for the closest one, tearing at the tape until the lid popped open. Inside, there were stacks of old VHS tapes, all labeled with dates and times. Dozens of them, some dating back years. I didn't understand. Were these recordings of people? I grabbed one of the tapes, my hands trembling as I read the label. Subject 001, Day 28. It was old. The ink faded, but I could still make it out. Who were these people? And then it hit me. The cameras, the tunnels, the hidden compartments in the walls. Whoever had set this up, whoever had been watching, they weren't just watching me. They'd been watching everyone who had lived in this house for years. I stumbled back, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. That man in the chair, he was just one of many. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the last. I turned back to the man, the flashlight beam shaking as it landed on his lifeless face again. My heart dropped when I noticed something I hadn't before. A small earpiece in his ear, barely visible, hidden under his hair. It was old and wired, like something you'd see in a spy movie. I leaned closer, my stomach churning with dread, and gently tugged the earpiece free. As I did, a small crackle of static came through, and then I heard a voice, low, barely a whisper. "Are you ready to be next?" My blood froze. The voice wasn't coming from the earpiece. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was nothing there, just the same narrow tunnel leading back to my bedroom. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. I backed toward the door, my mind screaming at me to get out, to leave everything behind and never come back. But before I could move, something shifted in the darkness at the far end of the tunnel. A figure, barely visible, was standing there, watching me. I froze, my heart racing. The light from my flashlight barely touched them, just enough to see the outline of a person, tall, motionless, just like the figure I'd seen in the live stream earlier. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching me. I took a step back, my hand fumbling for the door behind me. The figure didn't move, but the air in the tunnel felt heavier, like the walls were closing in again. The suffocating silence was broken by the softest of sounds, the creak of the wooden beams above me. And then, without warning, the figure stepped forward. I panicked, slamming the door shut and bolting through the tunnel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I needed to get out. I stumbled through the narrow passage, dirt crumbling beneath my feet as I pushed myself faster. When I reached the closet, I yanked the panel closed, shoving it into place. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely lock the padlock. I could still feel the presence of whatever or whoever had been in that tunnel, standing just on the other side of the wall, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled back into the middle of my room, gasping for air, my head spinning. I glanced at the closet door, then at the rest of my room, like I expected the walls to start whispering again. And then my phone buzzed. Another notification. This time, I didn't need to check it to know what it said. I already knew. Live feed active. Bed camera. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart racing, my fingers trembling over the screen, but I couldn't make myself open it. I knew what I'd see. Another live stream, another camera I didn't know about, watching me from some hidden corner of the room. I dropped the phone and backed away from it, the overwhelming feeling of being watched closing in on me. My mind was spinning, and I didn't know what to do. The cameras weren't just hidden in the walls, they were everywhere. And whoever had put them there, they were still watching. They'd always been watching. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, slamming the front door behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly for hours, not sure where to go or who to tell. I couldn't call the cops. What would I say? That someone had been living in the walls, watching me through hidden cameras? It sounded insane, but I knew it was real. Every bone in my body told me it was real. Eventually, I checked into a cheap motel, somewhere far enough away that I thought I'd be safe. But as I sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark TV screen, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't safe. I'd never be safe. Because whoever, or whatever, was watching me. They didn't need the cameras in my house anymore. They could be watching me through any screen. I was hired to guard a facility, testing a super soldier program. One of the subjects escaped. So, this is going to sound crazy. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it myself. You know how people talk about sketchy government stuff happening in random, remote places? Yeah, well, I always thought those were just conspiracy theories. But now I'm not so sure. It all started about 6 months ago. I was struggling to make ends meet. Rent was piling up, my car was falling apart, and my dead-end security job at a mall wasn't cutting it. You know that feeling when you're so desperate that you start considering shady options. I wasn't quite there yet, but I was getting close. That's when I got a call from a guy who sounded way too professional for me to ignore. He didn't tell me his name, but he knew mine. He asked if I'd be interested in a high-paying short-term security contract. I figured it was some private gig for a rich dude who needed a bodyguard or something. But when I asked for more details, all he said was, "The less you know, the better. The pay's $3,000 for 2 nights of work. Are you interested?" I mean, $3,000 for 2 nights. There was no way I was turning that down, no matter how sketchy it sounded. I asked where I needed to be, and he gave me coordinates. I had to look it up on Google Maps, and the place was in the middle of nowhere, like literally off the grid. It was a couple hours outside of the city, deep in the woods, the kind of place you'd never go unless you had a damn good reason. He told me to bring my own gun if I had one, but not to worry if I didn't. They'd provide adequate protection. I figured that was code for, "We'll give you a gun," which should have been a red flag, but I brushed it off. I've done security jobs before, where they wanted me armed, so this didn't feel too weird. I accepted the job, and he told me someone would pick me up. "Tomorrow night at 10. Be ready. And don't tell anyone where you're going," he said. Then he hung up. So I was left with 24 hours to get my gear together, mentally prepare, and try not to freak myself out about what I'd just agreed to. I mean, yeah, it was weird, but I convinced myself it was probably just some tech company doing secret R&D or something. Private companies are always up to shady stuff, right? That night, a black SUV rolled up in front of my apartment at exactly 10 p.m. I was already waiting outside, trying to look cool, but inside I was low-key nervous. The windows were tinted, and the driver never got out. He just rolled down the passenger window and gave me a nod. I climbed in. The guy didn't say a word. He just drove. The interior of the car was super clean, like weirdly sterile. No music, no talking, just the hum of the engine and the soft sound of tires on the road. The drive felt long, but maybe that was just because of the silence. After about 2 hours of winding through empty roads, we turned onto a dirt path surrounded by thick trees. There was no way I could have found this place on my own. Eventually, we pulled up to a gate. I could barely see it through the trees, but it was this heavy-duty metal thing that looked like it belonged to some kind of high-security prison or military base. The driver rolled down his window and scanned some kind of badge. The gate opened slowly, and we drove inside. I remember thinking, okay, this is definitely not just some tech company. But hey, $3,000, right? We pulled up to what looked like a small bunker. There were no windows, just a reinforced metal door. 2 guys in tactical gear were standing outside, armed to the teeth. They didn't say anything to me, just nodded to the driver, who gave them a thumbs up before speeding off, leaving me there. One of the guards motioned for me to follow him inside. The second I stepped in, the first thing that hit me was the smell, like disinfectant and metal, sterile but unsettling. The hallway was dimly lit, and everything looked like it was made to withstand a bomb. I didn't have much time to process it because we were walking fast. We finally reached a door with a keypad. The guard punched in a code, and the door slid open. Inside was a small room with a single desk and a bunch of monitors. On the desk was a Glock, a radio, and a laminated map of the facility. That's when the guard finally spoke. Here's the deal. You're on watch for the next 12 hours. Your only job is to make sure nothing leaves the containment zone. Don't worry about anyone trying to get in. No one knows this place exists. But if something tries to get out, he paused, looking me dead in the eye. You stop it, no matter what. I wanted to ask what it was, but I didn't. He handed me a keycard and pointed to the Glock. You're armed. You're ready. You don't need to know anything else. Just stay alert. With that, he left the room, leaving me alone with the monitors and my thoughts. The screen showed different angles of the facility, long hallways, locked doors, and empty rooms. Everything looked calm, but there was this tension in the air, like the quiet before a storm. I kept telling myself it was just another job, just another paycheck. But deep down, I knew something was off. And that's when I noticed it. One of the monitors, the one showing the containment zone, started flickering, just for a second. Then it went black. I leaned in, staring at the screen, waiting for it to come back on. When it finally did, something had changed. The door in the containment zone was open, and I swear, something moved in the shadows just beyond the camera's view. I stared at the screen, my pulse spiking. The door in the containment zone was open just slightly, but definitely open. It had been sealed shut when I first checked the monitors, and now there was this sliver of darkness beyond it that the camera couldn't quite capture. My first instinct was to get on the radio, but then I hesitated. I remembered what the guard had said. You don't need to know anything else. Just stay alert. They didn't want questions, and I wasn't trying to mess up what was supposed to be an easy gig. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was a glitch. Equipment malfunctions all the time, right? Or maybe one of the other guards had opened it. They'd probably come back to close it soon, I told myself. But then I saw it. On the far edge of the screen, in the corner of the frame, something flickered. It was just a shape, a shadow. No, not a shadow, but a blur. Like someone, or something, had moved through the room too fast for the camera to catch clearly. I leaned in closer to the monitor, squinting at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But whatever it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. I reached for the Glock, my hand shaking a little. I'm not gonna lie, I was starting to regret taking this job. $3,000 or not, nothing about this was feeling right, but I figured I could tough it out for one shift. 12 hours. How bad could it get? The radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. I picked it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Containment doors open. Is that supposed to happen? There was silence for a beat. Then a voice responded. The same guard who'd left me in the room. Stay where you are. Don't leave the control room. We're handling it. I didn't like the way he said, handling it. His voice was clipped, tense, like he was holding something back. Before I could ask any more questions, the radio cut out again. I stared at the monitors, watching for any sign of movement. But everything was still. The other cameras showed nothing but empty hallways, locked rooms, and that weird sterile quiet that seemed to cling to the air in this place. Whatever I thought I saw, it wasn't showing up again. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing. I kept replaying that flicker on the screen, the way the door had just opened. Maybe it was just paranoia creeping in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The fact that the guard didn't tell me to check it out, or even to lock it back up, only made me more uneasy. Time dragged. I tried to distract myself, running through the map of the facility. Most of it was labeled in ways that didn't make much sense. Observation rooms, test chambers, Zone A, Zone B. The containment zone was marked in red, a big block of restricted space. No details about what was inside, just a name, Project Ascendant. No one ever mentioned super soldiers. I didn't even know if that's what it was at this point. But the whole vibe of the place screamed military experiment gone wrong. And from the little I'd seen so far, I had a gut feeling that whatever Project Ascendant was, it wasn't something I wanted to meet. A few hours in, I started to feel like maybe I was overthinking it. Nothing had happened since the flicker on the camera, and the radio had gone quiet. I thought about just riding it out, zoning out until the shift ended, and collecting my paycheck. Then, right when I was starting to relax, the power went out. Everything plunged into darkness. The monitors, the overhead lights, everything. I couldn't see a thing in front of me, like the kind of pitch black where you start questioning whether you're even still in your own body. I fumbled for the radio. Hey, power's out. Can someone check that? Nothing. Not even static this time. I waited a minute, 2 minutes, hoping the backup generator would kick in, but it didn't. Just silence. Complete, terrifying silence. And then, footsteps. I froze. They weren't loud, but in the total darkness, they echoed. Soft, almost careful. Like whoever, or whatever, was making them didn't want to be heard. But I heard them. They were coming from the hallway just outside the control room. Slowly, getting closer. I pulled out the Glock and aimed it at the door, even though I couldn't see a damn thing. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. It was faint, like it was coming from the depths of the facility, but unmistakable. A screech, high-pitched, inhuman, and followed by a low, rumbling growl, like metal scraping against metal, but alive. The kind of sound that makes every hair on your body stand up. I stayed frozen, gun in hand, waiting for something to burst through the door, but nothing came. The footsteps had stopped completely. After what felt like forever, the lights flickered back on. The monitors buzzed back to life, and I quickly scanned them, looking for anything out of place. The containment door was still open, but the room beyond it was empty. The radio crackled back to life. "Power's restored," the guard said, his voice as flat as before. "Everything's under control." Under control? Really? After what I just heard, I seriously doubted that, but I wasn't about to argue with the guy who had the key to my paycheck. Still, I couldn't shake the dread creeping up my spine. Something was wrong in this place. Seriously wrong, and I was pretty sure I wasn't getting the full story. I still had several hours left on my shift, and I wasn't sure if I'd even survive the night. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I stayed glued to the monitors, every tiny flicker making my heart jump. But there was nothing else. No more footsteps, no more screeches. The containment zone remained open, but whatever had escaped or been let out wasn't showing itself again. When the SUV finally came to pick me up at the end of my shift, I practically ran out of the building. The guard who'd briefed me the night before was waiting by the car, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Good work," he said, as I climbed into the back seat. "Same time tomorrow night." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, staring out the window as we drove away from that bunker in the woods. But I knew one thing for sure. Something had escaped from that facility, and whatever it wasn't human. The whole drive back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just dodged something dangerous, like I'd walked away from a car crash without a scratch. My brain kept replaying that screech, those footsteps outside the door, and the way the guard had said everything was under control. He said it like he didn't even believe it himself. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was just spooking myself out because I didn't know what was going on. But there was something about that facility that didn't sit right with me. Something that had me wondering if the $3,000 was even worth it. But, being the genius I am, I decided to go back. I mean, the money was too good to pass up, and part of me figured that maybe I'd just gotten unlucky with some weird technical glitch. Maybe that screech was just equipment malfunctioning, or one of the guards messing around. I kept telling myself that as I sat around my apartment all day, trying not to think too much about what I'd seen. By 10 p.m., the same black SUV pulled up outside, right on time. The same silent driver, the same tinted windows. I climbed in, feeling like I was walking into a trap, but too stubborn, or maybe too broke, to turn back. The drive was just as quiet as before. No one said a word, and when we arrived at the facility, the two guards outside barely glanced at me. They just waved me through like I was another cog in their machine. I tried to ignore how tense the air felt as I walked back into that cold metal hallway. When I got to the control room, everything was the same. The monitors, the Glock, the map. It felt like the night before was just some weird dream. But there was one difference this time. The containment door on the monitor, still open, wide open. I stared at it, my stomach dropping. I half expected something to come crawling out of the shadows on the screen, but the room was as empty as it had been the night before. No flickers, no shapes, just that open door, like a black hole, waiting for something to step through. I picked up the radio, not sure if I even wanted to ask. Containment door is still open. Should I be worried? A few seconds passed. Then the guard's voice crackled back through. Do not approach the containment zone. Stay in the control room. We'll handle it. We'll handle it. The same line as last night. Something told me they weren't handling it at all. I settled into the chair, keeping my eyes glued to the monitor. Every minute that ticked by felt like an eternity. I was ready for something to go wrong, ready for the lights to cut out again, or for those footsteps to start up in the hallway. But nothing happened, at least, not at first. About 3 hours into my shift, just when I was starting to believe I might get through the night without a repeat of the weirdness, something flickered on the screen. This time, it wasn't just a blur or a shadow. No, this time it was clearer. There was something moving in the containment room. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. I can barely describe what I saw because my brain kept trying to convince me I was imagining it. But there it was, plain as day on the monitor. It was hunched over, its limbs way too long for its body, with skin that looked too pale, almost gray, like it hadn't seen the sun in years. Its back was arched unnaturally, and its arms dangled, almost touching the ground. But what really got me was its face. Well, the lack of a face. Where its eyes and mouth should have been, there was just nothing. Like someone had taken a wet sheet of skin and stretched it over its skull, covering every feature. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what I was looking at. The thing moved slowly, methodically, like it was testing its surroundings. But there was something off about the way it moved. It was too smooth, too quiet, like it had forgotten how to make noise. I picked up the radio again, my hand trembling. "There's something in the containment zone. You guys seeing this?" No response. "Hello?" I repeated, more urgently this time. "Do you see this thing or not?" The radio crackled, but instead of the guard's voice, all I got was a low hum of static, like someone was jamming the signal. Or worse, like they didn't want me to hear whatever was happening on their end. My heart was racing, and for a split second, I considered running, just leaving the control room, grabbing my keys, and driving as far away from that facility as I could. But then I remembered the guard's warning. If something tries to get out, you stop it. I didn't even know if I had a chance in hell of stopping that thing, but I wasn't about to sit there and wait for it to stroll out into the world either. I kept my eyes glued to the screen. The creature, or whatever it was still in the containment room, but it wasn't pacing or searching. No, it had stopped, and now it was facing the camera, like it knew I was watching. My blood turned to ice as I realized it wasn't just facing the camera. It was staring at me. I don't know how, but I could feel it watching me. That eyeless, featureless face seemed to lock onto mine through the monitor, like it was aware of me on the other side. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, with one impossibly long limb, it reached for the door. I sprang to my feet, grabbing the clock off the desk. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard I thought it might burst. The creature's hand touched the door on the screen, but before I could even react, the power went out again. Pitch black. I fumbled with the radio, shouting into it this time. "Power's down! The thing in the containment room. It's moving. Someone respond." Nothing. I gripped the Glock tighter, backing up against the wall of the control room, trying to stay calm. But then, through the darkness, I heard something I'd been dreading since the moment I walked into that place. The footsteps. They were soft, almost cautious, but this time they weren't outside the control room. No, this time they were coming from inside the containment zone. The same steady, deliberate steps I'd heard before, but closer now. Way too close. The radio crackled again, but it wasn't static this time. It was a voice, a different one from the guards. This one was softer, almost like a whisper, and it said something I'll never forget. "Let me out." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My brain was screaming at me to move, to get the hell out of there, but my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. "Let me out," the voice repeated, closer now, like it was right outside the door. And then the footsteps stopped. There was a soft click, the sound of the control room door unlocking. I stood there, Glock in hand, my breath stuck in my throat. That soft click echoed in my ears like a gunshot, a sound too ordinary for the chaos I knew was coming. The door had unlocked, and I hadn't touched it. I could still feel the weight of the silence after that voice. Let me out. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. But it had spoken with a calmness, like it was trying to reason with me, like it knew I'd be terrified, and was enjoying every second of it. My mind raced. There were no windows in the control room, no other exits, just that one door between me and whatever was now waiting on the other side. I kept telling myself that the door wouldn't open unless I turned the handle. I hadn't heard it move yet, but I could feel it standing out there, just on the other side, waiting for me to make a mistake. My palms were slick with sweat, and I wiped them against my shirt, trying to steady my grip on the gun. Every part of my body was screaming to run, but where would I go? The bunker was a labyrinth, and I didn't know if I'd make it out. Besides, I'd seen the way that thing moved on the monitor. It was fast. The monitors flickered. I forced myself to glance at them, desperate for any clue, any explanation for what was happening. The cameras were still rolling, and I saw it. The containment zone was empty. That thing wasn't in its room anymore. I looked at the door again. My heartbeat was so loud, it felt like the whole room was vibrating with it. I thought about shouting, about calling for help over the radio one more time, but I knew it wouldn't matter. There was no help coming. I was alone in here with whatever had escaped, and I had no idea what it wanted other than to get out. And then the door handle turned, slowly, so slowly, like someone was testing it. My breath hitched, and I leveled the gun at the door, my finger trembling on the trigger. The handle didn't turn all the way. It stopped halfway, like the thing outside was giving me a chance. Or maybe it was just playing with me, savoring the fear. I couldn't let it in, no matter what. I took a step forward, trying to gather the courage to lock the door again. But before I could move, the voice came back, softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, let me out." I froze. The voice, it sounded different now, less threatening, almost childlike. I didn't know if it was a trick, but something about it was wrong, like it was trying to mimic the way a person would ask for help. The tone was too flat, too rehearsed. "Please," it repeated, the handle twisting just a little more. I'm scared. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just trying to get in, it was trying to manipulate me. That voice, those words, they weren't real. Whatever this thing was, it knew enough about humans to mimic us, to make me doubt my instincts, make me second-guess the danger. It was learning, adapting to get what it wanted. The door creaked slightly, the handle now nearly vertical. I backed up to the far side of the room, my gun still aimed, but I knew that if it came through the door, I wasn't going to have enough time to stop it. I could shoot it, sure, but what if bullets didn't work? What if it moved too fast? I needed a plan, fast. I scanned the room again. There, in the corner, was an emergency lockdown button. I hadn't noticed it before, hidden beneath the desk's edge. It was probably meant to seal the doors in case of a containment breach. Why hadn't they told me about it? My mind screamed at me to move, to get to that button before the door opened any further. But I couldn't make myself take the first step. It was like the fear had rooted me to the spot, forcing me to listen to the thing on the other side of the door as it spoke again, its voice barely above a whisper now. "It's cold out here. Please." There was no cold. Not in this facility. Not underground. But still, the way it said, it sent chills down my spine. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus. I wasn't going to fall for this. I wasn't going to let it in. Not after everything I'd seen. Not after that inhuman screech. The way it had moved. The eyeless face staring straight into the camera. I wasn't about to open that door for something that wasn't even trying to hide what it was. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged toward the button. My fingers slammed down on it, hard. For a split second, nothing happened. My heart was in my throat, thinking maybe it was too late. But then I heard the heavy clunk of metal sliding into place. The door locked. For a moment, there was silence. No movement, no voices. I stared at the door, my pulse still pounding in my ears, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then slowly, I heard the footsteps again. They weren't soft anymore. They were heavy, dragging, like whatever was out there was furious now, no longer trying to coax me into letting it in. It didn't ask for help. It didn't speak at all. It just waited. The thing started pacing back and forth in the hallway, the sound of its footsteps scraping against the metal floor. It was close, so close, and I could feel its frustration growing with every step. It wanted in, but the lockdown had worked, for now, at least. I sank into the chair, my hand still gripping the Glock, staring at the door like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I kept telling myself that it was over, that I'd locked it out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. That thing was learning. It had watched me through the cameras, mimicked a human voice, figured out how to work the door. How long before it figured out how to get past the lockdown? How long before it got smarter? The radio crackled to life again, startling me. But this time, there was no static. It was the guard's voice, flat and emotionless. "Shift's over. We're sending a car." I stared at the radio, my mind racing. Shift over. Just like that. No one asked about the creature. No one told me what to do next. It was like none of this mattered to them. Like they didn't care that something was pacing right outside the door, getting smarter by the second. "We'll handle it," the guard had said before. But it didn't feel like they were handling anything. It felt like they were testing something. Testing me. The SUV pulled up not long after. I stepped out of the facility, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face, and climbed into the car. The driver didn't look at me, didn't ask any questions, just drove. As the facility disappeared behind me, one thought kept circling in my mind. Whatever they were creating down there, it wasn't done yet, and neither was I. By the time I got home, I was done. Mentally, physically, everything in me was screaming to never go back. But no matter how many times I told myself I was out, something gnawed at the back of my mind. The money, sure, but it wasn't just that. It was like I was tethered to that place now, like whatever was inside that facility wasn't finished with me yet. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice. Let me out. I kept picturing the faceless thing in the containment zone, the way it had turned its head toward the camera, like it could see me. And then there was the pacing, the way it had dragged its feet outside the door, knowing I was trapped inside. It wasn't just brute force or blind rage. That thing was thinking. Whatever Project Descendant was, it wasn't just about creating something strong or fast. They were trying to create something smart, maybe smarter than us. The next day, I told myself I wouldn't answer the phone. But at exactly 8 p.m., it rang. And of course, I picked it up. "You know the drill," the guard's voice said, flat and detached, like nothing out of the ordinary had happened the night before. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up. But instead, I found myself asking, "Is the thing in containment?" There was a brief pause. "Containment is secure," he said, but I didn't believe him. Still, at 10 p.m., I found myself back in the SUV. The drive felt longer this time, and when we arrived, I noticed the guards outside the gate were different. These guys looked even more serious, their faces tense, and they were carrying heavier weapons. Something had changed. As I walked into the facility, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The hallway felt narrower, the air heavier. I could almost hear my own heartbeat over the silence. When I got to the control room, I checked the monitors immediately. The containment door was closed, and for the first time, I felt a small wave of relief. Maybe this would be an uneventful night, but that hope didn't last long. I settled into the chair, trying to convince myself this was just another shift. Just a few more hours, and I'd be done. But about an hour in, something new caught my eye. On one of the monitors, a hallway leading to the containment zone, there was movement. At first, I thought it was just one of the guards making rounds, but as I squinted at the screen, I realized something was wrong. The figure was tall, but its movements were too fluid. Its arms hung low, its head tilted slightly, like it was scanning the walls, the cameras. It wasn't walking like a person. It was the thing from the containment zone. The door hadn't been breached. There was no alarm, no red lights flashing, but somehow it had gotten out. And this time, it wasn't moving aimlessly. It was moving with purpose. It was heading for the main part of the facility. I grabbed the radio, my voice shaky. Containment's been breached. The subject is loose, heading toward the main hall. No response, just static. I stared at the monitor, watching the thing creep down the hall. Every step slow, deliberate, like it knew I was watching. And this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, in the shadows, were more of them. 2, maybe 3, all moving in the same unnatural, slithering way. There were more. I slammed my fist on the desk. No one had told me there were more. No one had even mentioned the possibility. All this time, I thought it was just one subject. But now, as I watched the group glide through the facility, I realized I'd only seen the tip of whatever hellish iceberg was lurking below. Panic surged through me. My mind raced. If they made it out, if these things got out into the world, there was no way to predict what they'd do, how many people they'd hurt. I had to stop them. I didn't know how, but I had to. I glanced at the map. There was one door between them and the main facility exit. If I could get there, maybe I could lock it down manually, trap them inside, but that meant leaving the safety of the control room. I hesitated, staring at the Glock. It suddenly felt useless against whatever was crawling through those halls, but I didn't have a choice. I wasn't going to sit there and wait to die, so I grabbed the gun, the radio, and my keycard, and I bolted. The second I stepped out into the hallway, I regretted it. The air felt different, colder, heavier. The fluorescent lights above flickered as I made my way toward the main door. The footsteps I had dreaded the last 2 nights were back, only now they were faster. I could hear them, echoing down the corridor, getting closer. I was running now, sprinting toward the exit. The door was just ahead, reinforced metal with a keypad next to it. I could hear the creatures behind me, their unnatural movements scraping against the floor, the soft patter of their hands and feet, too quick and too close. I slammed my keycard against the reader, frantically punching in the code the guard had given me on the first night. The door beeped, and I pulled it open, practically throwing myself inside. I hit the emergency lockdown switch on the wall, watching as the heavy door slowly slid shut behind me. But right before it sealed, I saw it. One of the creatures had followed me, faster than the others. It was just inches from the door, and for a split second, our eyes, well, where its eyes should have been, locked. It was a horrifying, hollow face, nothing but stretched skin and shadow. And then, the door sealed. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air, my heart thundering in my chest. I had locked them in, for now. But I knew it wasn't over. They were learning, evolving. That thing had nearly caught me, and the others would keep trying until they figured out how to escape. The radio crackled in my hand. It was the guard again, his voice flat, but this time there was a hint of something else in his tone. Satisfaction, maybe. "Good work," he said. "You've done your part. Your contract is complete." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was shaking too hard to even think. "We'll be in touch if we need you again," the guard added, and then the radio cut out. As I sat there, staring at the door, I realized something. I wasn't just guarding the facility. I was part of the experiment. And the worst part? They weren't testing the creatures. They were testing me. I accepted a job on the dark web to test software. I think it's spying on my entire neighborhood. Let me start by saying, I know the dark web is a sketchy place. I mean, who doesn't know that? We've all heard the stories. Illegal markets, weird forums, hackers selling stolen data, the whole deal. But I wasn't looking for any of that. I was just a broke college student, barely scraping by on ramen and instant coffee. So when I stumbled onto a post offering money to test software, I hesitated for all of 5 seconds before replying. The post was vague, like a lot of these things are. It just said something like, "Looking for beta testers for a new program. High pay for a few hours of work. No experience needed. No details, no company name. Just an anonymous contact." I figured, worst case scenario, I'd be wasting a few hours on some shady software that didn't work, right? Best case, I'd get paid and delete the thing after. It sounded like easy money, which I desperately needed. After I replied, things moved fast. I got a response within minutes, almost like they'd been waiting for someone. The message came through in broken English, which threw me off a bit at first. But hey, not everyone is a native speaker. It was just some guy, or maybe a team, called Ferron. No profile pic, no info. They asked if I had a PC with decent specs, and when I confirmed, they immediately offered me $500 to test out the software for just 3 days. All I had to do was keep it running and send back daily reports on how it affected my system. $500 for 3 days. It felt too good to be true, but again, I wasn't in a position to say no. The next email came with a download link and some vague instructions. I remember thinking the name of the software was weird. Cerbernet, like the 3-headed dog from Greek mythology, Cerberus. But whatever, right? I clicked the link. The download itself took less than a minute. I half expected my antivirus to go nuts, but it didn't even blink. That should have been a red flag, but I brushed it off, thinking they'd somehow made the program immune to detection. The icon that popped up on my desktop was simple, just a black square with white text spelling out Cerbernet. Nothing flashy, nothing special. When I opened it, there was no installation process, no splash screen. The window that popped up was almost disappointingly plain, just a blank terminal waiting for me to enter something. The instructions were simple. Run the software and let it operate in the background. You won't see any changes, but it'll gather data. We'll contact you if there's an issue. At this point, I felt like I was getting paid to do nothing, which honestly was the dream. I ran the program, and just like they said, nothing happened. No pop-ups, no visual interface, nothing. I left it running and went about my day. For the first day, everything was fine. My computer didn't slow down. I didn't notice any weird glitches, and it didn't seem like the program was doing anything at all. I was tempted to turn it off, but I wasn't about to lose that $500 over impatience. Then things started to get strange. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. I just started noticing little things. Glitches, almost. Like I'd be watching YouTube, and the video would freeze for a second. But it wasn't the kind of freeze where the whole screen locks up. It was more like the picture stopped, but the audio kept going. And when the video unfroze, it would jump ahead, like it had been recording the whole time and was catching up. At first, I thought it was just my internet being trash again, but then it started happening with offline stuff too. I'd be typing a paper for class, and my screen would freeze up for just a moment. Then everything would fast forward. It was subtle, but definitely weird. I shrugged it off. It was only a few days, right? I figured I could deal with some minor glitches for $500. But by the second night, things started getting even creepier. I was up late, working on an assignment, when I heard it. A faint clicking sound, like someone tapping on a keyboard. I live alone, so hearing that noise was unnerving. At first, I thought it was coming from my neighbors. Thin walls, you know. But when I listened closer, I realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from my own speakers. I froze. My speakers were on, but I hadn't been playing any sound. It was just that quiet, rhythmic clicking, like fingers tapping on a keyboard. But in the background of whatever I was doing, my heart started pounding, and I quickly muted the sound, thinking it was some weird feedback issue. But even with the sound off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I checked Task Manager to see if the Cerbernet program was hogging any resources or doing something weird. But again, it looked like nothing was happening. The program was there, sitting in the background, using a tiny bit of CPU, but no more than a normal process would. I was starting to feel paranoid. Was this thing actually doing something, or was it all in my head? I told myself I'd just stick it out for one more day, finish the job, and then delete it. Easy. The next day, though, things took a turn I wasn't ready for. The third day started like any other. I woke up, grabbed some cereal, and sat down at my desk. I hadn't really thought much about the weird stuff from the night before, chalked it up to stress maybe. But as soon as I sat down at my computer, the feeling came back. You know that sinking feeling you get when you know something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it? Yeah, that. The Cerbernet program was still running, as expected. But this time, when I moved my mouse, the cursor lagged behind just a bit. Not enough to really be annoying, but enough to make me notice. It was like my system was sluggish, even though Task Manager wasn't showing anything unusual. CPU usage was normal, memory wasn't maxed out. Everything looked fine on paper, but something was off. I tried to brush it off and get some work done, but every now and then I'd catch my screen flicker. It was subtle, so subtle that at first I thought maybe I was just tired. But it kept happening. Every few minutes the screen would blink. Just a quick flash, almost like someone was taking a screenshot or switching between windows. I was about to send a message to the Farron guy to ask if this was normal when I noticed something else. Something way worse. I have a second monitor, right? I use it for streaming videos or keeping extra tabs open while I work. But when I glanced over at it, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, on the second monitor, was a live video feed. It took me a second to register what I was looking at, because I didn't have any programs open that should have been showing video. But there it was, a grainy black and white video feed of what looked like a street. My street. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch, like maybe my webcam had turned on by accident and was recording through some security software. I didn't know I had, but the angle was all wrong. The camera wasn't showing my house. It was pointed at the street outside my window, but higher up, like it was mounted on a pole or something. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen. The more I looked, the more certain I became. It wasn't a webcam. It was a street camera, like one of those security cameras you see on traffic lights or in parking lots. That's when I started to freak out a little. I didn't have any software that would give me access to street cams, and even if I did, why would it just randomly start showing me live footage? I quickly checked my system, but nothing unusual was running, at least nothing that stood out. The Cybernet program was still sitting there, innocuous as ever, but now I was starting to wonder what it was really doing. Before I could process any of it, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the notification, and it was an email from Farron. It was short, almost too casual. "Keep it running. You're doing great." Now maybe I was overreacting, but that message felt way too timely. Almost like they knew I was starting to question things. I was about to shut the whole thing down, but something stopped me. I don't know what it was. Maybe curiosity, maybe fear, but instead of turning it off, I decided to do something I probably shouldn't have. I opened the command prompt. Look, I'm not a hacker or anything. I don't know how to code, but I've taken enough computer science classes to know how to poke around a little. I figured if this program was doing something shady, there had to be logs, or at least some trace of what it was accessing. What I found was worse than anything I expected. I typed in a few basic commands to check the processes Cybernet was running, and that's when I saw it. Buried deep in the program's code was a list, an impossibly long list of IP addresses. I stared at the screen, scrolling down, and realized these weren't just random IPs. They were local. I copied a few of them and ran a trace. Every single one came back to devices in my neighborhood. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. This thing wasn't just using my computer. It was accessing every device connected to my local network. And not just mine, other people's too. The video feed on my second monitor flickered again, and this time, it wasn't just showing the street. It was switching between different cameras. One moment I saw my street. The next, it showed the parking lot at the grocery store down the block. Then the park where kids usually play. It was like the program was cycling through security feeds all around my neighborhood. And then, without warning, the camera switched to a close-up of a house. My house. I jumped back from my desk, heart pounding. The camera was zoomed in on my front door, and it was live. I could see myself through the window. I was standing in the room, staring at the screen, and there I was, barely visible through the glass, a dark silhouette in the grainy feed. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, watching myself. Time felt like it stopped. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was someone spying on me? Had the program taken control of local cameras? I felt exposed, like every move I made was being watched. I finally snapped out of it and reached for my mouse, ready to kill the program. But just as I was about to close it, the camera feed changed again, this time showing something that sent a bolt of fear through my entire body. It was my neighbor's house, a single, dimly lit window, and inside, I could see someone sitting at their desk. They were hunched over, typing away on the computer, completely unaware of the fact that they were being watched, just like me. I wanted to throw up. My first instinct was to call someone, anyone, but who would I call? The police? And say what? that some dark web program was hacking into security feeds and spying on people in my neighborhood. They'd probably think I was crazy. I shut down my computer, unplugged it from the wall, and just sat there, staring at the blank screens. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and all I could think about was how much I wished I'd never clicked that damn link. But the worst part? Even with everything off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that camera feed. My house, my neighbor's house, the streets around me, like I was living inside some twisted surveillance system. My computer was still shut down, unplugged even, but that didn't stop the paranoia from creeping in. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a camera lens reflecting back at me from the shadows. The next morning, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep sitting around, waiting for, well, whatever was happening. I decided to check on my neighbor, the one I'd seen in the camera feed. I barely knew him. We'd exchanged the occasional wave or polite nod in passing, but nothing more. Still, something about seeing him on that screen, so unaware of what was happening, made me feel like I had to reach out. I threw on a hoodie and went outside, trying to act casual. It was early, probably too early to be knocking on doors, but I didn't care. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. Everything felt off. When I reached his house, I hesitated for a second. What was I even going to say? Hey, I think we're both being spied on by some creepy dark web software I downloaded. Yeah, that would go over well. But before I could overthink it, I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. I could hear movement inside, the faint sound of footsteps coming toward the door. My heart started racing. What if he knew? What if he was in on it? But when the door opened, all I saw was a man who looked just as exhausted and paranoid as I felt. He was probably in his late 30s, early 40s, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. We stood there, staring at each other for a moment, until I finally said something. Hey, I'm from next door. I stopped, trying to figure out how to not sound like a complete lunatic. Have you noticed anything weird lately? His reaction was immediate. His face paled, and his eyes darted around like he was making sure no one else was listening. Without saying a word, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. Okay, so that was unexpected. The inside of his house was a mess. Papers and empty coffee cups were scattered across the floor, and there were dark circles under his eyes that told me he'd been dealing with his own version of hell. He didn't ask me any questions, didn't offer me a seat. He just walked over to his computer, which was sitting on a cluttered desk in the corner, and pointed at the screen. I stepped closer and immediately recognized what I was looking at. Cybernet. It was running on his system too. The same black terminal window, the same eerie silence, like it wasn't doing anything at all. But he didn't need to explain. I could already tell from the look on his face that he knew exactly what was going on. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Since last week, he said, running a hand through his hair. I thought it was some basic security software at first. They offered me good money, so I figured why not, right? But then the glitches started. First on my computer, then my phone, and then... He trailed off, glancing nervously towards the windows. It's not just our systems. This thing, whatever it is, it's bigger than that. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "You've seen the cameras, haven't you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, but it's not just around here. I've been seeing feeds from places I don't even recognize. Streets, parks, homes. Hell, I saw a camera inside a convenience store last night. I don't even know where it was, but the timestamp was current. Real time." I stood there, my mind spinning. So it wasn't just my neighborhood. This program had access to cameras everywhere? "Why haven't you shut it down?" I asked, a little too harshly. "I tried," he said quickly, his voice strained. "It doesn't matter. Even if you unplug everything, even if you wipe your system, it just keeps coming back, and it's getting worse. Yesterday, I started hearing things. Whispers, like someone's listening through my own speakers." He looked at me with a haunted expression. "I think it's in my phone too." That was the final straw for me. This wasn't just some messed up software glitch. This was something deliberate, something way beyond my understanding. My skin crawled at the thought of it. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that this thing had access to countless cameras, or the idea that it was listening to us, tracking our every move. "We need to get rid of this," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He looked at me, like I'd just said the dumbest thing in the world. "You think I haven't tried that? Look, man, I don't know who's behind this, but they're good. Really good. It's like they're a step ahead, always watching. I even tried contacting some tech forums, anonymous ones, but my messages disappear. It's like they're erased before anyone can see them." My head was spinning. I had no idea what to do, but I wasn't about to sit back and wait for things to get worse. "There's gotta be a way," I insisted. "We just need to find out who's running this, and—" "I already tried that too," he interrupted, his voice shaky. "There's no trail. The dark web contact I had, gone, like completely wiped off the face of the internet. No way to track them down." I was about to respond when something caught my eye, a flicker on his screen. It was the same flicker I'd seen on my own system, the one that looked like a camera switching feeds. And then, there it was again, a live feed of my street, but this time it zoomed in closer. The feed showed the front of his house, and there, standing in front of his door, was me. The timestamp was from just a few minutes ago, when I'd been standing outside, knocking. The blood drained from my face. "They know," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're watching us right now." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaky hands, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw the notification. It was from the same email address. Ferron. "Don't interfere. Finish the job." I stared at the message, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was about to say something when my neighbor's phone lit up too. He checked it and looked at me, wide-eyed. "They just sent me the same thing," he said, his voice barely audible. The room felt like it was closing in on us. Whoever or whatever was behind this, they were watching, and they knew we were talking. I felt exposed, like a rat in a trap with no way out. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing his arm. "Now!" But just as I turned toward the door, I heard a noise that stopped me cold. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder. It was coming from his speakers, the same rhythmic tapping noise I'd heard before, the sound of fingers on a keyboard. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the computer. It was coming from inside the house. For a second, neither of us moved. The sound of tapping keys, soft, steady, deliberate, echoed through the house. My skin went cold. every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, to run. But I was frozen, standing there in the middle of my neighbor's living room, staring at his speakers like they were about to come alive. He heard it too. His eyes were wide with fear, darting toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. That was where the sound was coming from, and it was getting louder. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, my throat dry. He didn't answer, just shook his head slowly, as if he didn't want to say it out loud. I could see it in his eyes, though. He knew something was terribly wrong, but he didn't want to admit it. Neither did I. We were in over our heads, and whatever this thing was, it wasn't just software anymore. It felt alive, like it had wormed its way into our world and was starting to make itself comfortable. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening, waiting for something else to happen. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered. Not just the lamp in the living room, but the entire house. It was like the power was struggling to stay on, the lights dimming and buzzing with a low hum that vibrated through the walls. And then, a voice. At first, it was faint, barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind. I thought maybe I was imagining it, my mind playing tricks on me, but it grew louder, more distinct, until there was no denying it. A garbled voice was coming from the speakers, speaking in a low, distorted tone, like someone was trying to communicate through layers of static. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it sent a chill crawling up my spine. It was almost robotic, but there was something human in it too. Something that made my stomach churn with unease. "Turn it off," I muttered, my voice barely more than a breath. My neighbor was already at his desk, frantically clicking at the mouse, trying to close the CerberNet program. But nothing was working. The window stayed open, stubbornly refusing to respond, the flickering screen taunting us with that damn live feed of the street. And the voice. It kept going, broken phrases that were just clear enough to make my heart race, but not enough to understand. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the power cord from his computer, expecting everything to go dark, but it didn't. The screen stayed on. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. The computer shouldn't have still been running. I'd unplugged it, physically disconnected it from the wall, but the monitor was still flickering, and that voice, it was still there, echoing through the room like a presence that had latched onto the house itself. "This isn't possible," my neighbor muttered, his voice shaky. I glanced at him, panic rising in my chest. "What do we do?" Before he could answer, the voice stopped, and for a moment, everything was eerily quiet again. The screen on his monitor flickered one last time, and then it went black. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, thinking maybe it was over, that whatever this was had finally stopped. But then, the silence was broken by something far worse. Footsteps. Not the light tapping of someone walking down a hallway, but slow, heavy footsteps, like boots hitting the hardwood floor with deliberate force. The sound was coming from behind us, somewhere deeper in the house, and it was getting closer. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I turned toward the hallway, my body tensed, every instinct telling me to run. But I couldn't move. Neither could my neighbor. We just stood there, staring at the darkness at the end of the hallway, waiting for something to emerge. Is someone here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. He didn't answer. He was staring down the hallway too, his face pale, his hand shaking. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that was coursing through me. Whoever, or whatever, was in the house with us wasn't supposed to be there. The footsteps stopped just before reaching the living room. For a few agonizing seconds, we stood there in silence, waiting. I could feel the sweat trickling down the back of my neck, my muscles tense, ready to bolt. But nothing happened. The hallway remained empty, the shadows undisturbed. And then, I heard it again, the tapping. But this time, it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from the walls. A rhythmic, metallic tapping, like fingers drumming against a hollow surface. The sound moved, slow at first, but then it started to pick up speed, echoing through the room, circling us. It was coming from all directions, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. We were surrounded by it, trapped in some kind of twisted game we didn't understand. My neighbor grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "We need to go," he whispered, his voice filled with terror. I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted for the front door, not bothering to look back. My heart was racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't care about my computer, my job, any of it. I just wanted to get out of that house, away from whatever had followed us in. As we reached the front door, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I was too terrified of what I might see. But some sick curiosity made me glance down anyway. It was another email from Ferron. This time, it was only 2 words. Too late. I didn't have time to react. As I reached for the door handle, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. A voice. No, not just a voice. A growl. It was low, almost inhuman, reverberating through the walls like it was coming from the very foundation of the house. And then, slowly, I heard it. Words forming, distorted and broken, but unmistakably real. "You belong to us." We didn't wait to hear more. My neighbor yanked the door open, and we sprinted outside, our feet pounding the pavement as we ran into the street, away from the house, away from whatever nightmare had taken over. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but I barely noticed. I just kept running, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. We didn't stop until we were a block away, gasping for breath, my neighbor leaning against a fence, looking as shaken as I felt. We stood there, staring back at the house in the distance, the front door still wide open, the shadows inside shifting like something was watching us, waiting. "We can't go back," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the program I thought was just some simple beta test had turned into something much darker, something that wasn't just messing with our computers. It was messing with us. But I wasn't ready for what came next. Just as I was about to suggest we go to the police, his phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen, his face going pale. "It's them," he whispered. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. He showed me the message, and my blood ran cold. "You're already home." We stood there, staring at his phone, our breaths fogging up the cold night air. "You're already home." Those 4 words felt like they'd punched me in the gut. My neighbor's face was pale, his hand trembling as he held up the phone. Whatever this thing was, it was toying with us, watching us every step of the way. "We need to go," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "We need to get as far away from here as possible." He nodded, but we both knew, deep down, that there was no running from this. We had no idea how far this thing reached, how deep it had dug into our lives. It wasn't just in our computers anymore. It was everywhere. In the cameras, the phones, the walls. It was the walls, the screens, the wires. We were living inside its web. We started moving, walking quickly down the street, trying not to look back at the house. I could feel eyes on us. Or maybe it was just the paranoia, the sense that every dark window, every shadowed corner was hiding something. The quiet suburban street felt like a trap, like we were being herded. I was about to suggest we head for the police station when his phone buzzed again. Another message. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't help himself. This time, there was no text, just an image. He showed me the screen, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of us, right there, in the middle of the street. The photo had been taken seconds earlier. Same street lights, same houses in the background. But the angle, it was like the camera had been right behind us, close enough to touch. We both spun around, hearts racing, but the street was empty. Just dark houses and a faint breeze rustling through the trees. But something felt off, like we were being watched from every angle, even if we couldn't see it. "I can't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't keep running." "We don't have a choice," I replied, my own voice shaking. "This thing, whatever it is, it's not going to stop. We have to figure out how to shut it down." "Shut it down?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How? It's inside everything. My phone, my house. Hell, it's probably listening to us right now." He wasn't wrong. There was no safe place to hide from it, no corner of the world where it couldn't reach us. But there had to be a way. There had to be. Then, almost as if reading my mind, his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it wasn't a photo. "You should have finished the job." I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. Finish the job. Was that what this was all about? Testing software. Was this some sick punishment for not completing the test? I thought back to the original instructions. Run the software for 3 days. Report the results. I hadn't reported anything. Neither had he. We were too freaked out by the glitches, the cameras, the noises, to even consider sending in a report. But maybe that was the mistake. Maybe this was all some twisted way of forcing us to play by their rules. "We need to end it," I said, the realization hitting me like a freight train. "We need to finish the test." My neighbor looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Finish the test? Are you serious? You think that's going to stop this?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's the only thing we haven't tried. Maybe if we send the report, if we give them what they want, they'll stop." It was a long shot. I knew that. But what other choice did we have? We couldn't run, couldn't hide. We had to confront it head on. And if that meant finishing the job they'd hired us for, so be it. We hurried back to his house, every step feeling like a mistake, but driven by desperation. The front door was still wide open, the shadows inside seeming darker than before. My hands were shaking as I plugged his computer back in, the CyberNet program still somehow running on the screen. The live feed was back, this time showing a wide-angle shot of the entire neighborhood. Streetlights flickering, houses bathed in darkness, and there, in the middle of the street, 2 small figures, us. I swallowed the rising panic and clicked into the program's terminal window. My neighbor stood behind me, his breath shallow, eyes wide. The screen was blank, just waiting for us to enter something. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not sure what to type. But then I remembered the original instructions. Send a report. I started typing, trying to explain everything we'd seen. The cameras, the glitches, the sounds, the way it had taken over our devices. As I wrote, the screen flickered, lines of code appearing and disappearing faster than I could read them. Then, as I typed the final sentence, something changed. The screen went black, completely black. No flickering, no code, just empty darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe it had worked, that somehow we'd completed the test, and this nightmare was finally over. But then a new message appeared, just 3 words. Not good enough. Before I could react, the live feed flashed back on the screen. But this time, it wasn't the street. It wasn't the neighborhood. It was inside the house. A grainy black and white feed showing the living room from a high angle, like a camera had been mounted in the corner of the ceiling. I could see myself sitting at the computer, my neighbor standing behind me, both of us staring at the screen in horror. "This isn't happening," he muttered, stepping back. "This can't be happening." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think that this was all some horrible dream, that we could still escape. But there was no waking up from this. We were trapped in a web of surveillance, a system that was watching our every move, controlling everything around us. The camera feed zoomed in closer, focusing on my face. I could see the fear in my own eyes, reflected back at me in real time, like the program was studying me, learning from my reactions. And then, for the first time, I heard it clearly, through the speakers, through the walls, through everything. A voice. It wasn't garbled anymore. It was calm, cold, almost amused. "You shouldn't have come back." My neighbor lunged for the power button, his hand shaking as he tried to force the computer to shut off. But it didn't matter. The screen stayed on, the camera feed showing us in real time, no matter what we did. The voice continued, speaking in a low, deliberate tone that made my skin crawl. "We see you. We always see you." I backed away from the desk, my mind racing. We had to leave. We had to get out of the house. But even as I turned toward the door, I knew it was pointless. This thing, whatever it was, had already won. It had already woven itself into every part of our lives, into our devices, our homes, our minds. There was no escape. I felt my phone buzz again in my pocket. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I pulled it out, my hand trembling, and saw the notification. One last message from Ferran. "You belong to us now." The screen went black, and everything went silent.